collected voice, photographs. So yes, there was need to kind of update the regulations on what and how the data was to be used for. So yes, Europe came in place with what we call the GDPR, and it's a very wide regulation. It doesn't only cover health research; it covers much more than health research, operations for banks, different industries. But yes, for example, in operations, how is the HR collecting and using your data? How are the finance people collecting, storing, and using your, specifically here, we say person identifiers. GDPR, to be very specific, looks at person identifiers, things that can be used to uniquely identify you. However, in research, we try to take it broader than just that. We take it broader than just person identifiers to any data that we collect from people or participants, as long as they are living. And why I usually want to take it wider than person identifiers is because, yes, for example, when we are sharing research data, we are supposed to share pseudonymized, but in most cases, we only share anonymized, which can be still linked back. So that's why it's better to look at it holistically, not just as personal identifiers, but any health research, any data that you have. Here will limit it to from participants, but like I said, it goes beyond participants' data or research data to even look at operations data. What data do they have about you as HR, as finance, as or any other department? How have they collected it? What are they going to use it for? How are they storing it? Yes. So I'm using the London School template, basically because for we're under London School, but GDPR, it came in as a European Data Act. However, after it, even after the Brexit, yes, UK or Britain also adopted it and didn't make any changes onto it. So worth noting is as we look at GDPR, we'll also be covering other data acts within it, because after GDPR coming into place in 2018, also different countries adopted their data regulations. They also, they updated their data regulations. For example, Uganda updated to the Uganda Data Act, Kenya came in the Kenya Data Act, South Africa, actually all countries. But the good thing is all of them, none of them kind of contradict. So by looking at one, then your idea looking at others. But worth noting is, if you're going to do, for example, a multi-country study, then you have to be conversant with the different regulations so that you do not fall short of any. For example, if you're going to do a study, let's say with South Africa, then you have to be kind of at least look through their data act to see that you're not. Now, for us here, we are basically using both the Uganda Data Act and GDPR simply because our sponsors are in Europe, or more specifically in UK. And the same thing I think applies to you. You have sponsors or funders who are across, or sometimes even share data across. That's why it would be good you abide with both GDPR and the Local Data Act. Like I said, the good thing is the Local Data Act doesn't contravene, or there are no contradictions between the Uganda Data Act and the GDPR. Issues would have been there if there were contradictions, and that's where I would now be looking at. Yes, we have to look at the local law taking precedence and that kind of thing. But like I said, the good thing is none of them contradicts each other. So as you can see, GDPR basically stands for General Data Protection Regulation. And most of GDPR's main concepts and principles are much the same as those in the data. So initially, or like I said, there were data acts or regulations, and the one that was there was called the Data Protection Act. But after that, that's when then GDPR came in. And basically, this is not a new act. Just like the Uganda Data Act of 2019 is not new. It's basically just looking at the existing one and then kind of tightening it or making it more stringent. So just like the Information Commissioner said, GDPR is an evolution, not a revolution, and it builds on the current data protection principles of fairness, transparency, accuracy, security, like we'll see. So yes, after Brexit, still for UK, still adopted the GDPR without any change onto it. So that's where here the question is, how about Uganda? Yes, also as Uganda, we also have our local regulation that was came into place in 2019. So basically, what are the key changes? Looking specifically at the GDPR, what were the key changes? Remember, like we said, there was the Data Act before, there was the Data Protection Act before, but then GDPR came into later. So what were the main changes? The main changes were, first of all, higher monetary penalties. Initially, the existing data regulations, even the one for Uganda, they were very, the monetary penalties were very little. If, for example, you collected data from a participant without consent from them, if you went to collect data and the participant told you is a relative, I don't have a pen, but I'll sign the consent later, and you collected data, and the person later went and sued you that collected my data without me appending my signature, without my consent. Initially, the penalties were not that much. That's why even the regulations were not stringent. But right now, the penalties are very high for non-compliance. If, for example, you collected data from participants and they didn't consent for you sharing it with external people and you shared it with external people, or if you said that you're going to share only aggregate data and you shared raw data, which can be even used to identify them, then the regulations, rather the penalties are really, really high. So the first and was higher monetary penalties for non-compliance. Penalties are now fixed at either 2% or 4% of that's the LSHTM's annual income. An example is a breach that occurred under the previous Data Act was only £800. Under GDPR, this has been calculated to be approximately 50 million. So that's the worth any now breach that you do or any non-compliance. If someone takes you to court, the penalties are really, really high. That's why you have to kind of make sure that you're abiding by the regulation. Then the second change was data classification. Right now, so they went in now with the GDPR, it now classifies clearly for you what personal information is, anything that can be used to uniquely identify a participant. Things like names, date of birth, address, email address. That's why we say as a regulation from this end that when you're collecting, for example, let's say data for a study, do not include personal identifiers with other research data on the same database. Usually it's good you separate it because most cases you won't need these personal identifiers for analysis. That's why most cases we say at least you keep this separate at the clinic in a lockable cabinet. If it's going to be on a computer, make sure either it's not so much on a network or but at least it's secure. Then you can have the other research data in a separate database, but do not have them on the same thing. So for personal identifiers, if you're going to collect them electronic, you have to make sure at least the database is encrypted and it's real secure. So that at least the things of breach are a little bit minimized. Then so anything like we've said that can be used to identify you, like your name, full date of birth. That's what we are saying now. In most CRFs, we no longer collect the full date of birth. We collect at least partial, just month and year. With month and year, that can be used for analysis. We do not need your whole date of birth because it's also now counted as a unique identifier. Anything like we do not collect like people's addresses, where exactly they stay. We can just say just Nachiwogo, but if you're going to take your full address that can be used to identify you, then we take that as personal information. Email addresses. So we said these can be collected, but if you're going to collect them, then the way you handle them is different. Do not collect them with other research data. Do not make sure at least their security and the way you're storing them is different, like we'll be seeing. Then it also goes on ahead to classify what it calls sensitive information. If you're going to collect things like racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious beliefs, trade union membership, physical or mental health, sexual life, criminal convictions, GDPR also takes things like genetic and biometric data where processed or uniquely identified. So if you're going to collect any of these, then also be mindful when sharing them because this is sensitive information. If you're going to, for example, share, or you're going to make a publication, you've collected this data, be mindful because it can potentially lead to identification of a group They may not be for a particular person, but to a group, depending on, for example, if you're only going to share data for 10 participants, let's say I came to collect 10 participants. Let's say I have only staff from the data section of UVRI, and I start saying I collected 10 data from 10 participants, and one of them was a criminal convict. Well, it can potentially lead to identification of who that person is. And then pseudo-anonymized data. We are saying with pseudo-anonymized data, this still allows for some form of re-identification, even indirect and remote, while anonymized data cannot. We say in most cases when we are collecting data, we separate person identifiers from other research data, but we usually link it with a PTID. Now, with that PTID, if I'm going to share data with another person, it doesn't have person identifiers, but it's still having the same participant ID, then it's still pseudo-anonymized. It means if someone got that data with that ID and somehow got back to the clinic, they can still link which participant is which. So in most cases, if you want to make it real anonymized, then you can kind of encrypt or interchange the IDs in such a format that someone can't be able to re-identify who is who. That's worth noting. When you're sharing data, sometimes when we scrap off all the identifiers and we share with only the participant ID, but still remember that's still anonymized, because the moment someone gets that, they can still be able to link it back to the clinic. So it's better you kind of get a way of changing the IDs in a format that, yes, the person is sharing it with can't link back to the clinic, but if they gave back to you for query resolution, you can still link it back with a master. This is where the PTID, the original PTID is, and then back to the clinic. And then also the other thing with the GDPR is consent. Initially, they would just give you a consent. If you look at the consents that were most studies or most projects were using before 2018, they would just give you the participant information sheet, and then down there they will tell you, sign here that you've agreed to all above. And you're signing, and once you've signed, then it means, yes, they can take photographs of yours, yes, they can share your samples, yes, they can take, but now it's saying no, consent must be freely given, specific, informed, unambiguous. Silence or predict boxes or inactivity will no longer constitute to consent. Sometimes they would give you with already the boxes predict, and you just have to sign down. But now the consent is very clear. There have to be boxes. I consent to collecting my data. I consent to my data being shared with other people, and you have to sign off onto each of those. I can decide to you collecting my data and you using my data for analysis, but not sharing it for secondary use. So it's now very clear on consent forms. All those have to be clear, and someone has to go and tick or sign on to each of them. It's no longer now being ambiguous. You just do a page, half a page, and then the participant signs, and you're saying that everything they are agreeing to it. It's no longer that. So it's now has to be very, very clear. Then the other thing is the school's response. So here, where there is school, you replace with UVRI. So the UVRI's response to a subject access request must be answered within 1 month. Initially, someone could come and tell you, you collected data from me, but I want to see the data you have about me. You're supposed to kind of give them the data, show them the data you have about them specifically. Someone can come and tell you, yesterday you collected data about my demographics, but I want to see what you collected. I consented to you taking my photos last year, but I want to look at it. You would respond to that request within 40 days, but now it's 1 month for you to respond to it, because there are times when you can respond and say, yes, this is the data I collected about you, or there are sometimes when you tell them, no, the data we collected about you, we've already either anonymized it and we can no longer be able, sometimes there could even be samples, or it's genome data, you can no longer tell who is who. But at least you have to give them a response within 1 month. And then the UVRI's response to a data breach has to be reported within 72 hours. And this applies to both GDPR and the Uganda Data Act. You have to still back to the Uganda Data Act. Each institution like UVRI, IAV, MRC, you have to register with the DPO of Uganda. Uganda has also a data protection officer. You have to register with them. And then for any potential data breach, like we'll see what what constitutes to a breach, but you have to report it. You have to report it here. We report it both to the GDPR of UK, and then rather to the DPO of UK and also to the DPO of Uganda. For UK, being that we're under London School has a DPO. So what happens here, if there is anything, loss of a tablet that had data or anything, I report to the London School DPO, and then he'll do a risk assessment and see. Sometimes he'll leave it there, or sometimes if really there is a lot of risk, he'll escalate it. But at least you have to report it within 72 hours. So same thing applies here. If the study you're doing is, let's say, under Georgia University, then definitely Georgia University has a DPO. That means you have to escalate. You have to report both to that DPO and also to the Uganda DPO. Then the other thing is data protection by design. Nowadays, before collecting data, you have to do a risk assessment. Data controllers, these are people who are collecting data, people who decide why and how should be processed, are expected to include data protection controls. Before you start collecting data, you have to put into place data protection procedures. If you're going to collect on tablets, are they encrypted? If it's case report forms, where are they going to be kept? If it's consents, where are they going to be kept? And then the other thing is data privacy impact assessment. Before you start a study, you're supposed to do an impact assessment and see what's the risk, what are the potential breaches, what are the potential gaps, how do we mitigate them? Who's going to be, if you are going to be using, if it's going to be a qualitative study and we're going to be using recorders, are they encrypted, are they password collected? How are we going to make sure that when these recorders are used, we won't, the people collecting data, research assistants won't leave the recordings there for another person to use, and they end up listening to these recordings. So you have to do kind of an impact assessment. Usually different institutes have different forms that kind of they go on pre-taking off to see. So you can also develop kind of an impact assessment that you used before a study coming into place. You look at the tablet, at the laptops where the data is going to be used by the data managers and statisticians. Are they encrypted? Are people using shared passwords? What are the risks? And then you kind of mitigate them. So these are some of the things that came into place with changes within GDPR. Yes, to continue from there, so there's what we call a data control and a data protector, rather a data processor. So we said where there is LSHTM, you can reply, whether you can replace with UVRI. So UVRI is legally responsible for demonstrating compliance with the 6 data protection principles. And these are the same also that Uganda lists. We shall look at them, what they are. Then LSHTM, ideally, every institute is supposed to arrange mandatory training for staff and students to enable them to comply. So something applies. GDPR is not just a thing for the data staff. It's basically everyone within the institute at UVRI. How are your interns handling the data? How are your drivers handling the data? Because they're the ones who go to the field to collect data. Just like you train everyone on GCP, same thing applies with GDPR. They are all supposed to be trained, even the operations staff. So we're saying you're supposed to conduct mandatory training for staff. Remember, you have trainings there, some that you consider as mandatory, some as optional, but at least this has to be mandatory so that people know what they are complying to. So that tomorrow when someone takes a tablet, collects data, and you're telling them do not take the tablets home, if they take them home and they lose them, they know that no, from GDPR perspective, I should report this within 72 hours. This is what I should do, that kind of thing. So for us here, we say the LSHTM may take disciplinary action against them, including immediate suspension or access to LSHTM facilities. In very serious cases, such people may face criminal investigation. We are saying here, for example, if the staff has been trained to not collect data without consent and you go ahead and collect data with consent, then that leads to disciplinary action. If we are saying in the car, for example, you're saying in the car, be mindful what you're talking. You've gone with the MRS or UVRI car, you've gone to the field to collect data. As you're coming back, you pick one of the participants. It's a rainy day, they tell you, please give me a lift. You give them a lift. But as you're coming back, there are counselors in the car. They come talking. They come talking, hey, Banai, the participant that I've just taken off information, can you believe she divorced? She divorced because the husband, she's told me she divorced because the husband was drunk. Because of this and reason. Question is, do you know that then potentially you're leading to disclosure? Is the other person in the car, what if they're related to that kind of thing? What if someone then later goes ahead and says, I gave you this information with consent that was going to be protected, but it's gone out. So we're saying in very serious cases, such people may face disciplinary investigation because we're saying we've trained you. So now you should be knowing what to be doing. That's why we're saying GDPR is not only a data staff training, but all staff. As we're saying, arranges mandatory training for staff and students, not just data staff. And then the principles of data protection. So these are the six, remember we said, remember we said that there are different principles. So GDPR sets out the following 6 principles of data protection that require personal data to be collected and used fairly, stored safely, and non-disclosed to any unlawful person. And the first principle, and these are the same as what Uganda also stipulates out. And we are saying, where we process personal data, we must do so lawfully, fairly, and transparently. Processing means collecting, storing, analyzing, all those constitute processing. So if you're going to collect data, whether it's for participants or staff, this must be done lawfully. Where we are collecting from research participants lawfully, what gives us the lawful bit is the consent, because it's gone through, it must be done with getting from ethics approvals. So we must only collect data lawfully, fairly, and transparently. Do not say you're going to collect this data and you're collecting some other data. We must only collect, store, or analyze personal data, but here we said we should widen beyond personal data to any research data that we are collecting for clearly pre-specified lawful purposes, and we cannot collect personal data for any other reasons. If usually nowadays you look at the proposal, when people are submitting the protocol, they'll tell them even to put there a draft of the case report form, so that it's very clear. If you're going to collect data for malaria in HIV, let's say pregnant women, then do not end up saying, that's the protocol is submitted. Do not start collecting from people things like cancer or anything else that, no, we can use this data later. It has to be for that you clearly specified, and also it's in the consent form. Don't collect what you aren't mandated to do. Then you must only collect enough personal data for stated purposes, same thing as above. The personal data we collect must be accurate and where necessary kept up to date. You have to put it to measures to see that the data you're collecting is accurate. We must not keep personal data for longer than is necessary. Yes, so for us here, LSHTM, we go by the LSHTM, which says we keep data for 10 years. However, if the sponsor specified otherwise, beyond that, then we go with what the sponsor said. If they didn't specify, we go for 10 years. If it's a clinical trial NDA, yes, they're saying 25 years, but the good thing here is we've started digitizing so that we keep the data electronic. So you have to keep into mind how long are you keeping your data. And we've said what stipulates that is either the sponsor, or if the sponsor didn't specify, then you could be having kind of a data retention policy, because you're not supposed to keep this paper forever. There is a period beyond which it will be not so much useful. Then we must only process personal data in a manner that ensures appropriate security, which includes protecting it against unauthorized or unlawful processing. So those are the principles. Then we talk of encryption. Remember, we're here as data managers, we're mostly keeping our data electronic. And we're saying as we're keeping it electronic, here at the MRC, every laptop or every device that we use has to be encrypted. So all members of replace this with UVRI. I hope the IT person joined. So we are saying all members of UVRI who use personal data must ensure they hold such data securely and that it's not disclosed to any unauthorized third party in any way, including by accident or particular. Any mobile device used by UVRI must be encrypted and password protected, whether supplied by UVRI or personal staff or student. You see, the problem is sometimes people will come in with phones and they'll say, put for me my email, configure my email onto my phone. The question is it encrypted? Because as I put for you to be able to read your email on your phone. Tomorrow, someone is going to send a salary sheet onto your email. You open it and it will be on your phone. What happens if tomorrow it is stolen? How sure are you that when someone steals the phone there, if indeed they have targeted that particular phone, they won't be able to access the data there? So all devices must be encrypted. Encourage the staff, even if they are going to use their personal data, rather inform devices to have them encrypted. Laptops. You don't want someone stealing a laptop and then now you start getting worried about the data that is there. Yes, in most cases here, the thieves will steal for just the value of the laptop, but what if it's a targeted stealing? That's why we're saying all these actually constitute breaches. The moment you lose a laptop that has data on, then you're mandated to report to the data protection officer, who will then do a risk assessment and see how was it stolen, what time was it stolen. They'll then do a risk assessment and say, no, this was just a random theft. Or these people who followed you, most probably they need access to the data there, and then they'll see which mitigation. Sometimes the mitigation measures will even involve seeing which data was there for which participants and may end up calling them to notify them. Take an example. If it's, for example, the HR who has your records and it's their laptop that has been stolen, and you find out that the person who stole it went to their home, didn't steal anything, but specifically their laptop. And their laptop, they had just downloaded, let's say, all your biodata. Would you want them to inform you, or they just keep quiet? And then tomorrow you start finding things about you in the news or everywhere. That's so and so. This is his family. He says his side. This is phone numbers. So that's what the risk assessment does. When you report to the DPO, then they'll do a risk assessment to see. And that's why we're saying sometimes they'll even end up calling the people who have been affected to notify them that, look, we've accidentally lost this data about you, so that you, the person who has been compromised, you see how to put in place mitigation measures. If, for example, I find that the data the HR has about me even has where my children are going to school, then I may be forced to call the school and tell them, please, no one should come for any of my kids. That's why we are saying, do not take it upon you to say, I've lost the laptop. They'll buy another one. I do not have to inform them. If you do not inform the DPO and then later that data is kind of misused, then that's when the issues will come up. So you have to inform them upfront. And they're saying USB sticks and removable storage must never be used unless they or the files on them are encrypted. Why we are saying this is sometimes you'll find someone they'll come with a flash. Put for me the data here. I'm just going to put it there. I'll delete it. You'll put the data on, or they could even be putting recordings. It was a qualitative, let's say, study. They'll put the recordings onto your flash. You'll take the flash. You may forget to delete. Next thing is you'll ask someone, put for me a movie here, and you're giving a DJ to put for you music there. And you don't know what they're going to copy from there. I don't know what they're going to use that data for. So that's why that's why we are saying for us here, if any USB is to be used or any removable storage, it has to be either for the project, or if it's your personal one, then it must be encrypted. If cloud-based storage is needed, this must be when no longer using Dropbox or Google Drive, because we're saying, yes, they're secure, but we have little control over them. Here, what we're using is mostly SharePoint. Either we're using SharePoint or OneDrive. We are not using other cloud storage. And yes, sometimes you're collaborating with other external people, and they say, no, you share this on Google Drive. You have to be, for us here, it's a very clear policy. Any data person sharing data has to be on SharePoint or OneDrive, because at least in there, the data there is more secure. Lawful conditions for processing data. So GDPR has classified the data controllers, like UVRE, must take care to choose the most appropriate lawful basis for processing, that's for collecting personal data. And these are the different ones where you can collect data, either by consent. And for us here, the unit, it's the only reason we only collect data by consent. But other reasons could be the collecting is required due to contract between the data controller and the data subject. Yes, if, for example, it's the HR the collecting your data maybe by contract, or if the data controller is obliged by law to process data, or collecting is necessary to protect someone's vital interests. But here, all these are to other, not basically to us. For us here, we only collect by consent. Mm. So, yeah, that gives basically about research data collected for research purposes and covered by GDPR. Like we said, GDPR covers much more than research. It covers also other things. I'll share this. Then rights. The people you collect from data have their rights. For example, they have the right to object. Someone can say, do not collect data from me, do not force them. If I come there and I'm picking data from participants, someone can say, do not collect data from me. They have that right. They have the right to be forgotten. You can collect data from a participant. They can come tomorrow and say, no, tomorrow collected data about me, please erase it. They can some withdrawing from your study. If there's some withdrawing from your study, the next question is, do I keep the data I already collected from you, or you want me to keep it? They can some withdrawing, but also delete my data. And then at that point, notify your DPO, who will look into it and say that, yes, the data we have this from this person, we can still be able to identify it, we can delete it. Or beyond this point, it's a bit hard to tell whose record is, who it has already been maybe used in analysis or that kind of thing. But they have the right to come and ask for it. Do not say, let me take that into my hand, notify your supervisor who will take it up. Then they have the right to challenge the basis for automated decision making. And yeah, we don't usually do that in research. Then they have the right to rectification. Someone can come and say, yesterday I told you I was 35 years, but I see you wrote 53. Please, can you correct it? I'm 35. Do not say no. We've been talking about data breaches, but what are examples of data breaches? So examples of data breaches include loss or theft of data or an equipment. The moment you lose data or an equipment, then notify your supervisor who will move it up and a risk assessment will be done. Do not take it upon yourself that the data I've lost, I was collecting data. If let's say it's a counselor, I was collecting data from this participant, but I've misplaced their consent from let them reconsent. Well, this or they sent for us CRFs for a study X, but I think they're misplaced. Anyway, Castar we had collected that the data in triplicate. Let's use the other one. No, not by a supervisor who will see, who will move it up. Inappropriate case control, access controls. If your door, you're a data manager in an office, you're seated in 3 people, 2 people, 1 person, you're all on the same project. You have access control on your door. You have people's case report forms there. Sometimes consents may be there. And then you're saying it has to be always locked, but then you leave it open. Someone selling peanuts in the morning, they come moving within offices. That's an appropriate access control. I used so sure this person selling peanuts when they came in and the doors open, you were all out. Are you sure they just peeped and went? How absolutely I assure you that they are not going to let's say take a pic of those forms that you have and use them for any gains. Unauthorized disclosure, like I said, you're in a car, you're seated, you're discussing, how should the person seated in? You're sending an email you want to send to Ayub Kakande let's say at Gmail, and you sent at Yahoo. How sure are you that there is no other person who has that email? If you accidentally wanted to send to Emmanuel at MRS and I sent Emmanuel an Gmail and he tells me that's not his email, what if there's someone in that email that now has got that data and I've emailed them person identifiers? You have to notify the person in charge. Then hacking attack. If you've gotten if your systems have gotten hacked into, you have to notify your supervisor who move it to the DPO. So if a data protection breach occurs, UV is required in most circumstances to report this as soon as possible, both to the Uganda DPO and to your sponsor. That's if the study you're working on has an external sponsor who's not, let's say, the government of Uganda, then you have to notify them within 72 hours. Yeah. So what do I need to do? So now that you've taken the course, what do you need to do to prepare for GDPR? Make sure you're aware of any records you hold that contain personal or sensitive data. Familiarize yourself with the data protection principles. Then contact the head of data management if you have any questions. Over there, you can contact your head who will then help you to clarify anything. Ask yourself the following questions. Do I need to keep this data? That's if you're holding any data that contains person identifiers. How old is the data that the unit is still keeping? Do you still need it? Is the data held securely if it's electronic or with a paper? Could this information be held elsewhere? If you're holding it onto your personal laptop, does it have to be there? Or you have a shared network drive where you can keep it where it's more secure? Where are you backing? How secure are the backups? Who am I sharing this data with? Do they need to see it? If someone comes, if Ayub comes and asks you for the data, yes, I'm the head of data in MRC, but I do not have any jurisdiction in UVRI. Do not give me that data. First check in with your supervisor, who will check with the consent form and any regulations there to see that the person you're sharing the data with, even though is in research, that you can give them that data. Don't just share it with me, first check in with your people. And then, am I starting a new project? Does the unit need to do a privacy impact assessment, which is where you can develop one? For us, basically, here, these are the different places where we say we can keep data and where we can't keep data. But yes, we say those with X, you can't keep that highly confidential. We basically classify data into public, internal, confidential, and highly confidential. And for the public data, we say this is information that is published to the public, and that we can keep it on the home drive or network drive. We can keep it anywhere. We don't put it on a secure server because we don't need it there. It's not private. And then there's what we call internal. These are limited to members of the UFRI and specific collaborators. Disclosure beyond this may result in temporary inconvenience to an individual. If you have sheets of people who are going where to different places, that's internal data. How do you share that? Then there's what we call confidential, limited to specific named individuals. Disclosure beyond this may or will cause significant or upset to individuals. Then there's what we call highly confidential, very rare, limited to specific named individuals. Your salary, that has to be kept highly confidential by the accounts person. So we give the different places where this can be kept. OneDrive or SharePoint. Those with X, we're saying highly confidential, do not even put on SharePoint. Those are only kept on the secure server or isolated rooms. Or if it's in the clinic, things like names, those kind of things, we keep it specifically at the clinic on paper or on non-network drives. Six steps to compliance to GDPR. One, what type of data if you're looking at compliance, what type of personal data do you gather? Why do you gather it? Do you regularly review the data for accuracy? How do you store it? How long do you keep it? Do you comply with the individual's rights to access and erasure? I'll share the slides with you. And then this kind of a risk assessment that we use. So basically, that's it for GDPR. Basically, that's it for GDPR. But just briefly, like I said, after the GDPR, different countries came in with their regulations. Uganda came in with what we call Data Protection and Privacy Act of 2019. And when you look at it, the same things we've been saying are the same things that it also put into place. When you go and look at operationalizing this, it's the same things that they also came in. Principles of data protection with data processor, host and collector. You must only process data fairly, lawfully. Use all the relatives, do not collect unnecessary data. So when you look through the Data Protection Act for Uganda, it's also basically a replica of the GDPR. That's why we're saying you read both of them, and then yeah, it has a data protection officer who you have to register with the office, and then yeah, and then also report to them. Consent talks about also consent, getting children. So it's the same thing. When you also look at the Kenyan Data Act, it's the same thing that it also has. It also has the same things. When you, sorry, didn't download. When you can look at the South Africa Data Act, the POPI Act, it's also much or less the same thing. So yes, in conclusion, as you look at GDPR, look at the Uganda Data Act and see that you are abiding with both regulations, with both the Uganda Data Act and the GDPR. And I think that's it from me in terms of the discussion. I won't really call it a training. It's more of a discussion. Open to questions for those that I can answer.
may have no question. Maybe I'll just appreciate Mr. Ayub for this opportunity and the training. Yeah? So we are really appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. Before I forget, in the chat, I've put there both the link for the registration for the BPO, but you can even read more about it for the Uganda Data Protection. They have their website and different things, but I've sent you the link for there. And then also for the retention policy that we use, I've sent you, you can see what to adapt for LSHT and for UVRE. Mm. Yeah, also about check it from you. Mm. 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 Okay. What was it supposed to be? It was.
Discussing other things.
I can't remember what it was specifically about. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. Maybe we can schedule another call with them. Looks like I've run out of time. Yeah, that's fine. I can schedule. Mm. Welcome. Okay, welcome. Okay. Thank you.